Alrighty. So this is the discussion session for chapter 12 on educational testing and assessment. So yeah, not that many today, but what do you think about the chapter?
No, I don't know if I was distracted this week while I was reading it, or if it actually is drier than the other chapters, but I really struggled to read it this time. Took me a while. Partway through, like the background areas, I thought it was like just repeating itself. Like I made a comment somewhere in there that it feels repetitive, that it's just saying kind of the same things over about trying to be fair and what else did it say? Make sure it's being used properly. Just stuff like that. I felt like it just kept saying the same things.
Yeah. Well, in general, I think that this chapter repeats a lot of other things that are mentioned, of things that are mentioned in other chapters. So yeah, but yeah, within the chapter also there are some topics that are mentioned many times in different contexts, but at the end are similar concerns or ideas. So it's true that might be a bit repetitive.
Right. Like I guess it's pretty similar to the last chapter, just in a different setting.
Yeah. Well, this is our chapter. I mean, for NCME at least. So yeah, I think, yeah, as I was reading the chapter, I felt that yeah, definitely there was more familiarity with the things that were mentioned. And still, I found like nice to kind of see a summary of the main type of users that you see in educational testing. However, I was surprised actually that they mentioned at the beginning that classroom assessment is not included. That was for me kind of like a surprise, a bad surprise. Because I mean, if you're not including, sorry, hello, Lavinia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. We started already to discuss a little bit about the chapter. Yeah, I was surprised that classroom assessment is mentioned at the beginning, that the recommendations for validity doesn't apply to classroom assessment. I think that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And I actually, I found that like a like a recognition that the standards are failing. Because I can see that the classroom assessment might be more micro and more contextualized, situated, etc. But still, whatever you propose for any test should also apply to classroom assessment in a simplified version of it, some adaptation of that, but still, it shouldn't be that it doesn't make sense to me that you need to create like a separation between large scale assessment and classroom assessment are testing anyways. So you should be able to find a way to put those in the same framework. But that I didn't like that, and I found that a bad thing actually. And if you are excluding classroom assessment, include that somewhere else. I mean, I think classroom assessment, they have their own, I won't say it's standards, but it's something similar to that. But still, they deserve also a section in the standards, I guess. So yeah, I was surprised with that.
Yeah, I was wondering if that stemmed from it already not happening, because if you look in individual classrooms, I feel like a lot of teachers haven't read these standards, right? It's not really for like a classroom teacher. And they'll just make their unit tests up as they go without really validity in mind. So like, I'm not sure how you would get the teachers on board for that, because it would be a whole different ball game, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the question about the validity of a test, even in classroom assessment, it is important. And actually, in classroom assessment, definitely the strategy needs to be different. It needs to be simple enough so a teacher can do it if they want to do it. You're right that eventually they won't have the incentive, but you don't know. And at least if a teacher wants to do it, you should provide some guidance on how to do it somewhere.
Yep.
So yeah, maybe the standard not the place. I don't know. I disagree. I think that should be considered part of testing. Also considering the fact that it's a big part of the experience, the educational experience of many people. So yeah, I don't know. I like leaving that aside is. And
One quick question. Which point are you discussing?
we are discussing chapter 12, and I was doing a comment about, let me see, like the first page. First page of the chapter, in the second paragraph, it says formal validation practices are often not feasible for classroom tests because schools and teachers do not have the resources to document the characteristic of their tests and are not publishing their tests for widespread use. So yeah, yeah, I was saying that I was surprised with that. And with the thing about resources, again, that's a problem. Whatever prescription you give to test validation, there should be a version of it that can be low cost. It can be done like without that much resources. The fact that we cannot do that is suspicious to me.
So what do you all think about this? Because the past 2 years, at least at University of South Florida, I've seen in the psychology department, okay, specifically, I don't know about other areas, but Canvas, when you put up an exam on it, like let's say multiple choice questions or something, after the students take the test, it gives you the item statistics like difficulty, discrimination. It tells you how many people answered correctly, and that's immediate, right? So those statistics, like at least over, let's say, maybe 3 or 4 semesters, when you're looking at how many students, say 300 students, that becomes your sample. And it does give you a fair idea of how the items are. I was just wondering what you think about these new tools that they can use. I'm sure, older teachers, they don't know how to use Canvas and they can't. But I think there is something there that can be developed, and at least teachers can be made aware of these resources so that they can use it.
I think those are great, because I don't expect teachers to open up R and run an IRT analysis on their, on their midterm tests results. So I think something that's got like an easy user interface would be pretty much the only way for like widespread teacher use.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was also surprised to see it, and I don't know how many of them are aware. I'm sure nobody outside the what do you say, psychology and education, at least the major departments that use these methods, nobody outside knows what difficulty and discrimination is. So there may be a little bit of training involved, but it's workable, right? But I agree with the idea that some sort of validation should be made available, in the educational and just teacher-student context as well.
Yeah. And I know for the education courses I TA'd, there was a chapter on reliability and validity to teach the teachers what to look for. But yeah, it was, like a 1 day, 2 lessons type thing that covered difficulty and item parameters and stuff, but it's not taught a lot, and I feel like it doesn't have enough emphasis for teachers to carry that through to practice.
That connect with another topic that is mentioned in the chapter about, I think it's assessment literacy, the word that they use. Let me look for that. I think it's assessment literacy. Yeah, assessment literacy and professional development. So that I found that interesting because at least in the psychological testing chapter, they mentioned this idea that when a person uses a test, they should have certain level of competence to know how to use it. And in educational testing, I don't think we are that how do you say that serious that to ask that level of enforcement, if you want to ask that the person that uses the test is so prepared or competent or show any degree or sense of competence. But the idea, at least, of assessment literacy is kind of pointing to a softer way of considering that aspect in test use. And I found that interesting. And I think that in general, the same way that you put a lot of effort for score reports, in which you kind of take care a lot about how people react to score reports and kind of how a more user experience approach to the thing. I think we can do the same with other levels of testing, particularly, for example, with the technical manuals or the instructions in general on how to use a test. I think there is a lot of room for improvement there to facilitate that assessment literacy and to make it easier to get, you know. They are, of course, a technical manual can be, will need to be more detailed and more technical, but also you can create like easier, like, I don't know, like easy to shoe. Is there a way to say that in English? Like, I don't know, like something nicer and user-friendly also in these other levels for the people that are using the test, for policymakers and so on. Yeah, there is for some reason we have worried more about the score reporting, but not necessarily about other levels in which you need to be more aware of the way in which the message is received.
Yeah, like a teacher-friendly handbook, basically to guide. Because I feel like a lot of the lack of representation of standards in educational testing comes from a place of ignorance, where a lot of teachers just don't know. You know, they haven't read the standards. They just don't know how they should be using the tests or making tests. So maybe like a handy resource that could be, you know, as widespread as the standards, but directed just to educators.
Yeah,
probably a good thing.
So what do you both think of? I mean, I don't know if it's there in somewhere in the chapter, but what do you think of educational assessments that are like outside the classroom? Not exactly like SAT or GRE level type, but I'm just trying to think of, you know, something that that is targeted at development at, let's say, a state level or something. Developmental assessments and yeah, just not credentialing, but you know what I'm trying to say, that let's say you're identifying hyperpotentials, identifying hyperpotential students and like saying, okay, you can skip a grade and then move on. But those kind of assessments, does it apply there as well? I'm just trying to understand the educational domain in general as to where the assessment standards lie over there for those kind of assessments. Did I make sense? I'm not talking about classroom assessments, but out of classroom assessments in the educational domain, how do you think those standards apply there? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understood completely, but I think in the chapter there is some mention of tests like the one you described, but I think because maybe there is not like something that maybe is not completely kind of explained in the chapter, is that it's kind of like the audience, or how wide is the audience. So the chapter is speaking a lot about tests that are very wide and very kind of like for everybody. But also you can have tests that are medium sized, that are not for one specific classroom, but also are not like for a whole country, maybe one state, one county, or I don't know, still with enough people that you can consider that serious enough, but still not that big. And in that you can find many, like some tests that are more closer to psychological testing, some more that are more to still make decisions. I think there are a few mentions in the chapter, but maybe that's not completely explained, I think. Did I understand what you were saying, Donia?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that kind of answers my question, but of course I have to read the chapter in detail to get that specific information. But overall, like even without the chapter, I do remember, like in terms of fairness and everything, I read that chapter recently, and I do think there are many guidelines there, but a lack of awareness of kind of how to use them and knowledge of if those methods are developed enough to use actually precludes us from, going forward in that area, I think. Yeah, in terms of like examining accessibility to constructs and all of that, there's a lot there that if you actually take it, expand it, and run with it like a research idea, you may be able to do more, but I don't know the state of literature there as well. I'm looking at your comments on the Envision board, so like try to speak about some of those.
I think this chapter, yeah, I think the concept of cultural sustainable assessment, or anything that kind of considers in a more specific way the culture of the test takers, I don't think that's mentioned enough in this chapter. It is considered at least the idea of accommodations and modifications, but it's always related with the idea of a disability that is kind of justifying that. But yeah, I have never kind of I haven't understand yet why we apply some concept for disability only and not for others, like softer differences in terms of how do you experience life. So yeah, I mean, when you have a person with a disability, it's very obvious that that person, the experience itself of being assessed is very different, and you may require to like either accommodate or modify. But in other cases, and there's still a lot of other cases in which you may want to bend a little bit the test, and particularly when a construct is not completely well defined. Usually we assume that there is a construct that is kind of super nice and very clear and very kind of specific, but sometimes it is not. And sometimes even if you have like a very clear story about what the construct is, still you may face like counter narratives, or like, I don't know, challenges to whatever you consider that construct is or should be. And
so let's talk a little bit about what defines the scope of the construct, right? Because if that's the starting point, then we're talking about what the construct definition is and who decides that. So partly that is mostly, actually, I would say not partly, most of it is just defined by what the curriculum entails, right? What the government or the university is deciding, this is the curriculum for this particular grade, so we're going to measure these constructs as defined by so and so, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, in the years that you go ahead, like it'll be revised, and tests will be revised accordingly and so on. But there's a starting point somewhere. And for most purposes, you would think it's accurate. It's not like so out of the world that you say this is not at all relevant to the subject that you're trying to assess in any examining. And then so you have some amount of error there. Okay, let's assume. But where it gets propagated is if you're not considering some applied considerations, like who's really coming. That's where your people with life experiences or disabilities will come into the picture, right? Because if you have not considered those kind of people in the picture, then you're eliminating a big subpopulation, and that will cause your psychometric issues like range restriction and this and that, and your test will not be valid for the purpose that you're intending to predict, like student performance or something. So over there you do need to consider. So life experiences, see, if you're going to school, you're just talking in the context of learning, and life experiences may not come into the picture, but maybe like a more plausible term would be something like psychological disabilities, or some sort of institution or like credible institution saying that, okay, this is what we are calling the disability, and that is the disability, or this is what we're calling that this person genuinely has like a psychological issue or anxiety issue, whatever it is, and that. And things are coming up. Like I know, like when I TA for class and all, I see students providing documentation on any kind of thing that they have, and that's confidential. So, and even there will be recommendation on how much accommodations you can provide. And according to what I read recently, though, I feel like the extent of accommodations you can provide and everything is also limited, because once you provide those accommodations, the scoring mechanisms change with respect to standard administration for people without disabilities or who are like participating in, let's call a big quote general category, right? So when that scoring mechanism changes, there's more research required on that scoring and how to make those scores comparable, and then on the basis of that, order everybody or rank order everybody in terms of a valid score. So that affects interpretations and all. So it's a really good time to be discussing all that, because now we have like more polarized societies, so everybody needs to be accommodated, things like that. But it's really cool, and I like that we're talking about this now, but just some thoughts running in my head while I was reading this last week.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have to keep all these points about error propagation in mind. And then I think one good bucket, and one of the books I came across was like, you think about psychometric considerations, you also think about applied considerations. That's your total test taker experience. Including everything, right? If they're comfortable, if they're engaged, motivated, what's the face validity, what's the test taker experience like, are they happy after they take the test, test taker reactions, etc. And then the third one is contextual considerations like diversity context, or like what's the context in which you're giving the test, etc., etc. And the fourth one is like most important, and probably what defines most of the practices nowadays, is just logistic considerations, how practically feasible it is, and things like that. So to achieve a balance between all these categories is like so challenging.
Sorry, Ivy is connecting. Hello there. Hi, Ivy. This will connect maybe too much on my own research, but as I was doing some literature review of the topics on my dissertation, I found this very interesting paper from it's two authors that speak about a test used to certificate language interpreters. So when you kind of learn language science, there is a whole certification around who is actually prepared to kind of like communicate with a person that needs that language, and if you are doing that correctly or not, to the point that you are kind of like certified to do that job. So translate. And in the paper, they discuss how absurd is that in the construct definition of a sign interpreter, there is no input from the people that actually are the main users of it. Like deaf people didn't have much input on the definition of the construct. So, and that is kind of in the context of an idea that comes from feminist epistemologies, and it's this concept of that is called situated knowledge. Basically, the idea of situated knowledge is that when you do scientific research, you need to be kind of aware of the situated nature of all knowledge generation, and assume that knowledge construction is always kind of like with multiple visions of it. You need to kind of like scientific work is about speaking about this multiplicity of point of views, and I think yeah, I mean, when you don't have like when you cannot elicit an experience that is really or truly comparable across examinees, our job, I think, to the minimum, is to kind of document that, at least, to make that visible, to speak about it, you know. So we sometimes are too kind of worried about coming with a solution, but sometimes there is no solution, and the only thing we can do is kind of make people aware of the problem and kind of document more about the nature of the problem and how exactly can happen that something is not comparable. And that's enough. And then later people will kind of have more information to use whatever you build, and will have like a more informed decision there. But I think our job, to the very minimum, is more about documenting stuff. It's more about like really going more into detail of how exactly is that something is different, or how exactly is that two life experiences react different for a test, for example. How is that, I don't know, you may consider a different point of view about a construct because of the narratives, or I don't know, like whatever people are saying about the test. And yeah, I think this particular case of this test for sign interpreters, I found that fascinating as an example, because it kind of shows you that sometimes we can miss the point a lot about we can miss the point when we don't include test takers into the picture, particularly when the construct is obviously requiring like their input. In the case of sign interpretation, I think it's even more obvious than ever, because it is very absurd that a person that is not like deaf will explain to a deaf person how is that you can talk to them. It's really, it doesn't make sense. And another thing that caught my attention during the reading of the chapter is when I speak about alternate assessments. And in general, the idea of needing more information, or kind of like collateral information, that is also mentioned in psychological testing. And here in this chapter is also kind of slightly mentioned. Sorry, I have my cat here. And yeah, I remember once I was reading about technology in general, like philosophy of technology. And usually we understand technology as a tool, but there are many other ways in which we can understand technology. And there is like some group of people that have been exploring what other metaphors are good to understand technology in general. And one that I like a lot is the idea of an ecosystem. So for example, a printer can be like a technology, and it's a tool to print. but you cannot use the printer if you don't have a lot of other little technologies that are around to actually use it. So around a printer, you will find like, I don't know, like staples, or I don't know, like a scissor, or like many other little things that create like an ecosystem for use. And yeah, when I was reading that, it was like, yeah, it makes sense. In general, test is like, I would say that it's weird that the test is alone or interpreted in an isolated way. And it makes sense actually to also think testing not necessarily as one product that you are building and the only device like the test that you're doing, but also as all the ecosystem that surrounds it, and how you can actually change a lot, like the quality of the experience of someone taking a test by also worrying about the ecosystem that you are creating. So, for example, what are the materials that are there for preparing the test? How easy is for them to access to the experience of taking the test in advance? What are the little tools that are there to use the test in a better way, and so on. So there is a big layer, and also this idea of alternate assessment. What other assessment you can have like next to it that can help. So yeah, I like a lot this idea of kind of thinking testing in a more ecosystemical way. I'm sure that makes sense.
It goes back to the point of trying to consider and account for as much as possible. And also I liked your previous point about how you should at least like start the conversation around it, right? I think like these are such good points to like include in our report that once people start changing their approach towards creating a test, like for example, like you mentioned, like an ecosystem approach, and that was a really good example I thought as well. So once that starts, and then everything else will fall into place. Only when you have that intention can you go about, trying to find the resources to help you do what you want to do. So that was good. But I'm just looking at it now, but I'm not sure I understood what is meant exactly by alternate assessments. So can you like clarify that? Like when are they used? For students with significant cognitive disabilities. Okay, so then instead of providing accommodations, you're just giving them like alternate assessments.
Yeah.
Okay, now I understand that. I see.
Yeah, I understood that was kind of variation of an assessment that might eventually change even the construct, or it depends. Sometimes it can be just changing the format, sometimes it can even like change the construct itself, but there are kind of variations that can be helpful to apply that to more people that require different tests. Yeah. Observation checklist, material level assessment with performance task, portfolio that includes responses to selected response, open-ended task. So it's also considering like a shift in the format.
Yeah, and I feel like now that you have access to so many more technologies, it may be easier to like create something that's to create alternate assessments than just than before, where you only had paper pencil, and anything else you had to do, you have to work really hard and try to make something manual. But yeah,
a lot of the conversation that we're having can happen, those conversations, because we can imagine how that can be done. Because we know that there is technology that is kind of close enough or already there to do those things. So yeah, I think the fact that there is technology available changes a lot the discussion about what is possible.
It's also like you need to find those subject matter experts who can actually say that or like, yeah, it's like a huge multidisciplinary collaboration initiative, because you're trying to find experts who know enough about the disability to say, okay, this kind of assessment will help. But at the same time, you're trying to find experts in the general area to say, okay, this was the assessment before, and this is the assessment now, and both these groups have to agree that these are equivalent in some sense. So that will be your content validation. And that's like a huge step, and only after that can you like move ahead and like do the more technical or psychometric analysis that's required to establish validity.
One thing that surprised me was in standard 12.1 that says that when educational testing programs are mandated by school, district, state, or other authorities, the ways in which test results are intended to be used should be clearly described by those who mandate tests. I felt a bit confused with that, because even if you mandate the test, I would say that the information about test use or what are the purposes of the test are written in a technical manner. That usually is written by the test developer, not by the person that mandates the test. So I was surprised actually to see that standard putting like the burden on the person that mandates, because I mean, I can see that the person that mandates, the institution or group that mandates the test is the one that will define that or decide on that. But the person that is putting that in a document is usually going to be the developer, not the mandate. So yeah, I was confused with that.
No, I see your point, and that's like such a tricky area, it seems like, just because you say it's being mandated by these authorities, and I'm not sure the authorities are ever going to be like transparent enough to state the ways in which test results are intended to be used. So yeah, and I don't know the scope of the scope of the test developers and users.
Because at least when you speak about monitor the impact and to identify minimize potential negative consequences, that responsibility, yeah, at some point, it kind of makes sense to me that it's the user, because the user is the first one that will witness those things. But yeah, the diffusion of responsibility, I think, is a general problem. That when you have like too many people and you don't know who exactly is responsible for what, and yeah, the standard kind of help to break that, but still, yeah, there are some counterintuitive assignations. And the other thing that kind of I was confused, or I didn't understand completely, the standard 12.18 says that in educational settings, score reports should be accompanied by a clear presentation of information on how to interpret the scores, including the degree of measurement error associated with each score or classification level. So degree of measurement error, I didn't understand that. Is that standard of measurement? Is that the reliability index?
No, yeah, I'm like trying to read through it, but at first glance, it seems like it's not going to make much sense to the user if you give them the degree of measurement error. Let's say students and parents are reading that. What are they going to know with that, right? Supplementary information related to group summary scores.
I mean, I kind of support in general the idea that you should report something with error. And in my mind, the best way to do that is to put the error in the same scale of the score. So for me, standard error of measurement is the best way to go when you have a score. But yeah, so I've been trying to trace through the standards if that's a standard or not. Then I don't think I have found that, because sometimes they speak about the need to if possible, no, not if possible. There is a more specific recommendation on speaking about reliability, but not necessarily about the standard error of measurement. And here in this standard is when I kind of felt that maybe it was more obvious the recommendation, but still the expression degree of measurement error. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
No,
what
I think I'm just looking at it. I think what they suggest is that score reports should include the date of administration and so information. Or I think the main reason for providing it is so that score users or like test takers can calculate the probability of misclassification associated with performance levels, and they can see how that sort of inference changes as time passes. I am not sure if that's something that should be given to the examinees, or like later when you're just like every year, let's say you have a GRE or some setting like that. Every year you try to publish all that information in a separate booklet. That seems like a very logistic issue, as well as something that would allow for reasonable time to pass before people who are not aware of all the issues make some sort of judgment immediately about the score, right? So maybe we should some time pass and like give it out at an appropriate time. I would think that may be a better approach, but I don't know. If that's the real purpose of doing it, then then it seems reasonable to do that, because scores for GRE right now is valid for like 5 years, right? So then people can make judgments about whether those 5 years are like enough or not.
I'm thinking I'm not sure if I understand everything you said, Lavanya, but I wonder if I don't think people update error of measurement. Like I don't think that's a thing that people do. But actually, it would make sense to do that. But under what updated information? So if as long as the time passes and you do this type of analysis that do like drift detection, you can kind of like reuse the item parameters to re-estimate error of measurement.
I would think, yeah, it may depend a little on the purpose of the assessment and how large scale, yeah, how big the scale of the assessment is. So if it's like large scale and high stakes like GRE or SAT, they may be doing more when compared to assessments that are targeted at very few people or something like that. But I do like the idea of conducting those studies to see what those how those errors of measurement change, because they do change over time, and at the same time there are many other concepts, or like I can't remember exactly, that does change the standard error of measurement, right? If we do if you actually get into the technical details, there's a lot of things. My main intention of bringing this up is to say that there are a lot of factors that can change those errors of measurement, and if you don't actually monitor how quickly or like how drastic those changes are or how quickly they change, it can affect the scores obtained as well as the interpretation of that scores and consequences. unintended consequences. This could be considered unintended consequences too.
Yeah, well, I think that in general the rules of using scores from the past, yeah, I think that's a loophole in our practices. We usually allow like this to, I don't know, last 1 year, more years, but that's more like a pragmatic thing. I don't think there's a real psychometric consideration there. And how exactly is that actually you change? So are you giving a score about that moment in the past or that representative of the present? If you're putting that in the present, then how accurate is that? How do you, because you can actually model the evolution of someone or the expected evolution of someone. For example, in cognitive psychology, when you study memory, and there are a lot of models in which you can have like functions that predict how quick you are going to forget stuff. So yeah, eventually you can do something like that to be more, I don't know, more smart, or sorry, smarter, in the way you use the scores from the past. Yeah. Okay. Any other comment, final comment, remark about the chapter?
I thought your comment about English language learners was really interesting. I had not thought of that before. Oh, it's actually from like a deficit perspective rather than like something more positive.
Yeah, but as a Spanish speaker, I always feel very triggered with the idea of English learners because it's like not no, it's like, yeah, it's like looking someone from what they don't know rather than for looking someone for what they do know. Actually, some little assignment that I had to do in my program, I could read a little bit more about English learners. And one thing that I found very sad is that long-term English learners are usually people that kind of like transition between school systems. So because they travel, some years are in the States, some years are in some other country. And these people, they spend their time to be bilingual. But their time that they're spent to be bilingual is not spent into increasing literacy on either of the languages they know. So when it comes to college admission, for example, and then you say, oh, this person has enough literacy to enter to college. Yeah, of course, maybe those long-term English learners won't be able to show that, but because they have been spending their time on being bilingual. And because of the fact that you are not valuing that they are bilingual, then you are putting them aside. Even when in the job market, you will need bilingual people. And that's kind of very absurd because you deny the entry of people that actually are bilingual, and then you raise people that later need to learn a language. Or actually you import professionals from somewhere else to fulfill your needs in terms of that type of thing. So yeah, I in general, the thing of English learners feels, I don't know, I think there is a deficit perspective on even the name.
Yeah, I know at my work we've transitioned to just using bilingual or monolingual to describe, because like we were really just looking at the difference between like mainly English speakers versus people who speak other languages or English as a second language. And we decided to just use the term bilingual to describe like a general population without trying to be reductive, I guess.
That's great. So, sorry, maybe we can spend some time to write questions because we have at least 5 minutes. So maybe we can write questions for Michael Walker. Michael Walker is the person that's going to respond our questions. He works at ETS, and he's in charge of a center for equity, I think is the name of the center he directs. Also, he's going to be the next NCME president. So he's very important and he's very good actually. And yeah, we can have some time now to ask questions, to write questions, and put likes also if you want.
How do I like put likes? Where is that option?
Let me show that. The thing is that depending on how do you log in, you will see that button, the reaction button. But
Yeah.
if you log in as a guest, I don't think you have that. But
No,
if you
but
have
like,
that,
yeah.
so if you have that, you click there and you will see that your mouse change. And then wherever you click with that thing, you will create like, so here, for example.
Oh, it'll show you the options there. Okay, I
Yeah.
have that option. I have that smiley face, but I was like, why isn't the light there? But I'll find it.
You need to
Thanks.
click and then you will see the options. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I think we're repeating a question about classroom assessment. Why is not there?
Yeah.
Alrighty. I think we're good. Well, you can keep writing questions and adding likes if you want. But as for the recording, I will stop.